The stars flickered in the distance, an ocean of burning lights stretching as far as the eye could see. The hum of the ship's engines was steady, a constant reminder of the fragile human vessel cutting through the cold, indifferent void. On board, the captain's eyes scanned the dark expanse of space ahead, knowing that they were about to face something no one could have predicted. The odds were impossibly stacked against them. But humans had never been known for backing down. Ahead, the fleet of the Galactic Empire, an unstoppable force. Their ships equipped with technology that seemed to defy logic, power beyond anything most races could ever dream of was waiting. The fleet was massive, a sea of warships designed for one thing: domination. The Empire had crushed countless civilizations, their iron grip tightening around systems, strangling any hope of rebellion. Their ships were swift, equipped with weapons capable of eradicating entire planets with a single shot. No one had ever stood against them for long. And yet, here, in the midst of the stars, a single human ship stood poised to challenge it all. The crew, a handful of survivors, were quiet in the command room, each one knowing that the fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of their captain. The ship, though advanced for human technology, was no match for the Empire's warships in terms of firepower or sheer size. It had only one weapon capable of breaking the Empire's hold on the galaxy. But would it be enough? The captain, standing tall at the helm, took a deep breath. He wasn't just leading this mission for survival. This was a chance for humanity to prove itself, a chance to show that they would never bow to any empire, no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful. His fingers hovered over the control panel, hesitating for a brief moment as the thoughts of their impossible mission flashed through his mind. His mind flashed to Earth, the home they had once known, before it was reduced to ash by the Empire's relentless advance. A sudden surge of anger boiled within him. He would not let it end here. He would not let humanity be erased from existence. "Status report," the captain commanded, his voice calm but firm. "All systems are online, Captain." "We're ready," came the reply from his chief engineer. The crew had trained for this moment for months, each of them ready to sacrifice everything. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back now. The screen in front of him blinked to life, showing the massive fleet ahead. The Empire's ships were closing in, their weapons already powered up, ready to unleash devastation. It was an intimidating sight, but the captain didn't flinch. They had no choice but to go forward. Humanity had always been underestimated, written off as nothing more than a fledgling species. But today, that perception was about to change. "Do we have a plan B?" a voice asked from the tactical station. The question hung in the air for a moment, unanswered. "No," the captain replied, his voice steady. "We fight, or we die." The tension in the room was palpable as the ship's engines roared to life, propelling them toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The crew braced themselves for what would likely be a suicide mission. There was no way they could win this. The odds were too great, the enemy too powerful. The Empire had entire fleets capable of overwhelming anything in their path. But they were human, and humanity had always defied expectations. The captain's mind raced, running through the calculations, the risks, the odds. One chance. They had one chance to strike, one opportunity to take down the Empire's most formidable force. It was a desperate, suicidal plan, one that had never been attempted before, and one that might fail. But even if they failed, even if they died trying, they would show the Empire that they were not as invincible as they thought. "Captain," came the voice of his communications officer, shaking him from his thoughts. They're locking onto us. They're firing their main cannons. The warning lights on the control panel blinked rapidly as the first salvo of the Empire's weapons surged toward them. The captain's fingers tightened around the controls, the ship lurching forward as it weaved through the oncoming fire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they still had one trick up their sleeve. "Prepare the weapon," the captain said, his voice low and determined. He didn't look back, not even for a second. There was no room for doubt. This was their only chance. As the crew scrambled to activate the ship's most powerful weapon, a weapon capable of disabling the entire enemy fleet in one strike, the captain's thoughts were a blur. This weapon, born out of the scraps of humanity's greatest minds, was the last remnant of their civilization. It wasn't enough to win the war, but it might be enough to force the Empire to reconsider their assumptions, to show them that even the smallest and weakest of species could rise up against oppression. The Empire's ships loomed closer, their weapons primed, ready to reduce the human ship to space debris. But they hadn't anticipated what was coming. They had underestimated the humans once again. The captain's hand hovered over the final activation switch. One last move, one final choice. The weapon would fire at the heart of the enemy fleet, creating a ripple in space-time that could collapse their communications and cripple their warships. But it was also a one-shot deal. If they missed, if the calculations were off by even a fraction, no one would ever hear the story of this human crew and their final stand. "Ready when you are, Captain." For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The universe around them froze. The weight of the moment pressed down on the captain's chest. This was the end, one way or another. He pressed the button. A flash of brilliant light erupted from the ship, a beam so powerful that it ripped through the fabric of space itself. Time seemed to slow as the wave of energy reached the first of the Empire's warships. The blast hit, and the massive ship disintegrated in an instant, the remnants of its hull flickering out of existence. One down, then another, and another. The fleet began to fracture, the mighty Empire's iron grip on the galaxy, shaking as their most advanced ships fell apart under the human weapons' assault. The captain could hardly believe it. It was working. But then, something even more unexpected happened. The remaining Empire ships started retreating, their once unstoppable momentum faltering as they scrambled to regroup. The humans had done it. They had cracked the seemingly impenetrable defense of the Empire with nothing but sheer willpower, ingenuity, and the relentless drive to survive. But as the final ship collapsed into the void, one question lingered. Had they won, or had they only just begun to draw the Empire's attention? The captain looked at his crew, their faces illuminated by the glow of the monitors, and knew that their fight was far from over. The Empire was still out there. And now, they would know what humanity was capable of. As the echoes of their victory reverberated through the ship, the crew's initial celebrations quickly faded into anxious silence. The blast had hit with stunning precision, but the cost of that one shot weighed heavily on their minds. No one had been sure it would work, and now, staring at the fragmented remains of the Empire's fleet floating in the void, a chilling realization settled in. They had just made the most dangerous enemies in the galaxy. The Empire's retaliatory strikes would be swift and unforgiving. The captain stood at the command station, his hands gripping the console, his eyes fixed on the starfield outside. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine the impossible, what it would mean if this victory could actually turn the tide of the war. If the Empire could be stopped. But that hope was fragile, fleeting like a single thread in a storm. They hadn't just wounded the Empire, they had shattered the illusion of their invincibility. And such a blow would not go unanswered. "Captain," the communications officer's voice broke through his thoughts. "Incoming transmission from the Empire." The words hit him like a cold gust of wind. He glanced at the screen, where a black, metallic symbol flickered, an unmistakable emblem of the Empire. A direct response. The transmission began, and the face of an officer appeared on the screen. His expression was calm, almost eerily so, as if the destruction of a portion of the Empire's might meant nothing. "I am Admiral Zorath." The officer's voice rang out, smooth and measured. "I must commend you on your victory." It was unexpected. He paused, as if considering his next words carefully. "But do not think for a moment that you've won. You've only ignited a fire that will consume everything you hold dear." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The captain remained silent, his eyes never leaving the screen. He could feel the weight of every word the Admiral spoke. Zorath's calm demeanor masked the rage surely brewing behind his eyes. He wasn't fooled by their success, and he wasn't going to take it lightly. "Your resistance, while impressive, is doomed to failure. The Empire does not forget. And it does not forgive," the Admiral continued, his tone never wavering. "You may have struck a blow today, but you've also signed your death sentence. Prepare for the consequences." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The captain took a deep breath, the weight of Zorath's words sinking in. It was clear now, this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a declaration of war. But the captain knew something Zorath didn't. Humanity's ability to adapt, to think in ways no other species could, was their greatest weapon. "Get me a status update," the captain ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. "I want to know everything about their remaining fleet." The crew scrambled into action, their hands moving swiftly over the control panels, analyzing every piece of data they had gathered from the enemy ships. There was little time to waste. They had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The Empire's retaliation would come with a force far beyond what they had just faced, and they couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. "We've detected several more fleets in the sector," the tactical officer reported. "It's not just one or two ships coming after us. They've mobilized an entire armada. Hundreds of ships, cruisers, destroyers, and even dreadnoughts. It's like they're throwing everything they have left at us." The words felt like a punch to the gut. A fleet this large would obliterate their ship in an instant. Even with their advanced technology, the odds were still impossible. But the captain knew they couldn't back down. He wasn't about to let the sacrifices of his crew be in vain. "Can we outrun them?" the captain asked, his mind racing through the possibilities. "We could try," the pilot responded hesitantly, "but they'll catch us long before we reach the edge of the system. We don't have the firepower to fight them off if they decide to swarm us." The captain nodded, his mind quickly shifting gears. "Then we need to be smarter. We don't need to outrun them. We need to make them chase us. Keep them distracted long enough for us to find a way out. Maybe even draw them into a trap." He looked to the strategist, a woman whose insights had saved them on more than one occasion. "What do you think? How do we turn the tables on them?" The strategist paused, her eyes flicking to the holographic map of the approaching fleet. "We need to use the environment to our advantage. We know the local system. We know where the asteroid fields are. We can use that to our advantage, create chaos in their formation, disrupt their senses, force them into a smaller, tighter formation. If we can get them to follow us into the minefield we've mapped, we might have a shot at thinning their numbers." It was a risky plan, a suicidal one, in many ways. But the captain could see the determination in his crew's eyes. They weren't going to give up without a fight. "Prepare the ship," the captain said, his voice resolute. "We're going to lead them into the asteroid belt. We'll make them chase us, but they won't know what hit them." As the crew scrambled to put the plan into motion, the captain stood at the helm, his mind racing. He had never faced an enemy like this before. The Empire's technology was far superior, their weapons devastating, their tactics ruthless. But humanity had something they didn't. A relentless drive to survive, a willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance at freedom. That was something no fleet, no empire could calculate. He glanced at the woman beside him, the strategist who had once been his greatest doubt. She had become one of his most trusted allies. Together, they had faced down the impossible before. But this was on another level. The enemy was relentless, their power overwhelming. And yet, there was a spark in his chest, a burning fire that had never gone out. "Ready when you are," the pilot's voice interrupted his thoughts. The captain gave a curt nod, his grip tightening on the console. "Then let's show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." As the ship began to move toward the asteroid field, the tension in the air thickened. The crew worked in perfect sync, their every movement guided by a singular purpose: survival. But the enemy was coming, and they were relentless. The question remained, could humanity's ingenuity and willpower be enough to face down an empire that had crushed entire civilizations? Or would this be the last stand of a species that dared to defy the odds? The answer was uncertain, and the clock was ticking. The ship's engines hummed as it rocketed toward the asteroid belt. The crew worked quickly, every second counting as the first waves of the Empire's fleet closed in. The captain's mind raced, going over the plan one more time. The asteroid field ahead was dense, filled with floating rocks of all sizes, perfect for the trap they were trying to set. The Empire, with its overwhelming numbers and advanced sensors, would find navigating the field difficult, but they had to make it work. If they didn't, there was no telling how long they would last against a fleet that could wipe them out in a blink. 10 minutes, the tactical officer called out, her voice steady despite the tension. The captain nodded, his gaze fixed on the shifting space ahead. He could feel the ship vibrating as the engines worked overtime to push them forward, dodging debris and moving ever closer to the heart of the asteroid field. He could hear the crew moving through the ship, their footsteps echoing in the corridors as they prepared for the coming battle. No one spoke, but the air was thick with anticipation. They all knew what was coming. "Do we have a clear path through the field?" the captain asked, turning his gaze toward the strategist. She studied the holographic map intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We've mapped the safest route through, but it's not perfect. If we're going to outmaneuver them, we have to time it just right. They'll try to stay in formation, but if we force them into a narrower channel, their numbers will be their weakness." He could see the plan forming in her mind, and it wasn't much different from what he had envisioned. "Then we make them pay for that weakness," he said, his voice low and determined. The crew's resolve was unshakable. They were ready. They knew they had only one shot at this. If they failed, they'd be annihilated. There would be no second chances. The sensors began to beep as the first Empire ships entered the system, their dark silhouettes growing larger on the view screen. The flagship, a towering dreadnought, led the charge, followed by cruisers and smaller frigates. There were hundreds of them, and they were coming fast. The Empire's commanders had wasted no time. "Brace for impact," the captain ordered. They're closing in. The ship veered sharply as the first salvo of enemy fire came whizzing toward them. The crew held their breath as the ship's shields absorbed the impact, rattling the entire vessel. The ship swayed, but held steady, its course unwavering as the captain piloted them toward the heart of the asteroid field. The enemy fleet fired again, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space, but the captain's focus was unshakable. His eyes flicked between the view ahead and the monitors, watching as the asteroid field loomed larger. The Empire's ships began to scatter, trying to avoid the dense rocks in their path, but it wasn't enough. They were out of position now, losing the perfect coordination they'd held before. "Now," the captain shouted. Without hesitation, the pilot threw the ship into a sharp roll, diving toward the thickest cluster of asteroids. The ship's engines screamed as they were pushed to the limit, narrowly dodging massive boulders that appeared out of nowhere. The crew gritted their teeth as they were thrown around in their seats. Every move felt like it might be their last. Every asteroid they narrowly avoided could have meant certain destruction. The Empire's ships followed, but their movements were slower, clumsy compared to the human vessel that had been built to navigate this very terrain. The first cruiser made a critical mistake, turning too sharply and slamming into an asteroid. The massive ship crumpled under the impact, its hull rupturing as debris flew in every direction. Direct hit. "One down," the tactical officer reported, her voice crackling with a mix of disbelief and excitement. But the captain didn't have time to celebrate. They had a long way to go before they could even think of victory. The flagship of the Empire, however, was more maneuverable. It glided smoothly through the field, its advanced sensors making quick work of avoiding the larger objects. The dreadnought was the heart of the fleet, and it wasn't going to be distracted by asteroids. "We're not going to shake them off this way," the pilot said, her voice tense. "We need to lure them further in, get them closer to the heart of the field." The captain nodded. "Keep pushing. We'll make them follow us." The ship surged forward again, darting between the massive floating rocks, the dreadnought hot on their heels. The crew knew what they had to do, but the stakes had never been higher. If they didn't succeed in trapping the remaining ships in the narrowest part of the field, the Empire would wipe them out before they could even get close to their next phase of the plan. Approaching the critical zone, the strategist reported, "If we can force them into the pocket, we can use the asteroid field as cover for the second phase." The captain took a deep breath, his mind calculating every angle, every possible outcome. The enemy fleet was relentless, pushing forward despite the losses they had sustained. The dreadnought's weapons continued to rain down, narrowly missing as the human ship danced through the field. But then, the unthinkable happened. A smaller Empire vessel, trying to keep up, collided with another asteroid. This time, it wasn't just the ship that was lost. It set off a chain reaction. The debris from the collision ricocheted through the field, creating a deadly storm of shrapnel. One by one, other Empire ships got caught in the deadly shower of wreckage. Explosions rocked the battlefield as ships were torn apart, the shockwaves reverberating through the field. "Is it working?" the captain asked, his heart pounding in his chest as the ship dodged more asteroids. "We've hit the pocket," the strategist exclaimed. "The enemy fleet is trapped. They're losing cohesion." The tension was electric as the human ship plunged deeper into the asteroid field, the Empire's fleet becoming increasingly disoriented. Yet, the flagship remained focused, relentlessly pursuing them, unwilling to give up its prey. The final showdown was coming, and the captain knew that the real test was yet to come. "Get ready," the captain muttered. "We have to end this once and for all." The crew braced for the final, desperate attempt. They had outsmarted the Empire's forces, but they couldn't rely on luck forever. Soon, the dreadnought would catch up, and when it did, there would be no turning back. The fate of the ship and the future of humanity was about to be decided. The asteroid field grew denser, its jagged rocks pressing in like a living labyrinth. But the captain's ship had outmaneuvered the Empire's forces so far, and they weren't about to stop now. The smaller ships in the fleet were scattered, wrecked and disoriented, as their massive dreadnought continued its pursuit, relentless as a shadow in the dark. The captain's crew had done what they could, using the environment to create chaos, but the flagship's determination was unlike anything they'd seen before. "Keep moving. We can still lose them in here," the captain ordered, his voice steely and controlled. He could feel the sweat forming at the back of his neck, the strain of the constant evasion pressing on his mind. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting to prove that humanity could face down the greatest power in the galaxy. But something felt wrong. The dreadnought, though damaged, was still closing in. Its weapons systems remained fully operational, and they were beginning to feel the sting of its precision strikes. The shields on the human ship flickered, groaning under the barrage of energy blasts. "We're taking hits," the tactical officer shouted, her hands flying over the controls. "Shields at 30%, Captain. How long before they recharge?" the captain asked, his mind calculating their options. "Not enough time," she replied. "Not with this much firepower coming at us." The captain's pulse quickened. This was at the tipping point. If they didn't find a way to break free now, it would all be over. They needed a new strategy, something unpredictable, something to throw off the Empire's relentless pursuit. "Can we divert some of the power to the engines?" he asked, thinking on his feet. They couldn't afford to play by their enemy's rules anymore. "Yes, but we'll have even less time for evasive maneuvers," the pilot warned, looking back at him. "It's a gamble." It was a gamble they had no choice but to take. He nodded grimly. "Do it. Push the engines to the max." The ship surged forward, its engines roaring as they diverted power. The sudden burst of speed sent them hurtling deeper into the asteroid field, moving faster than the Empire's flagship could follow. The crew braced as the ship bucked violently, its hull creaking under the stress of the power surge. For a moment, it seemed like they had managed to gain some distance, but the dreadnought wasn't done. It fired once more, and this time the shot came too close. The ship shuddered, a loud crack splitting the air as the forward shields collapsed under the pressure. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered. "Damage report," the captain barked. "We've lost several forward sections," the engineer replied, his voice strained. "We're exposed, Captain. Shields are offline. We're open to further damage." A new sense of urgency flooded through the ship. There wasn't time to waste. Their engines were pushing them forward at breakneck speeds, but without the shields, they were vulnerable. One more direct hit, and it could all come crashing down. "Can we reroute power from other systems to the shields?" the captain asked, his mind spinning. "We're already doing that, but it's barely enough," came the response. The engineer looked up from his station, his face pale. "We need to think faster. This ship won't survive another direct hit without major repairs." The dreadnought loomed closer, its shadow growing larger against the backdrop of distant stars. The crew's hopes were beginning to fade. They had thrown everything at the Empire's fleet, and yet it was clear the battle was far from over. The human ship was running out of time, and with no shields, it was only a matter of time before they would be destroyed. Just as the captain opened his mouth to give a new order, an unexpected sound broke through the tense silence. A pulse of static, then a voice. "Captain, do you read me?" The voice was familiar, but it wasn't from his crew. It wasn't from anyone on the ship. "Who is this?" the captain demanded, confusion flooding through him. He had heard that voice before, years ago, during the early days of the rebellion. A faint memory, but it lingered. "This is Major Kyle from the Resistance Fleet. We've come to help." The words hit the crew like a jolt of adrenaline. Their hearts skipped a beat. Could it be true? Had the Resistance managed to break through? How? The captain asked, his voice almost a whisper. "How did you find us?" "We've been tracking the Empire's movements for weeks. We knew they would send reinforcements. We also knew you'd be the perfect target. We've been watching you, Captain. We're not alone anymore." Before he could respond, the transmission cut off, leaving a heavy silence in the cockpit. The captain glanced at the communications officer, whose fingers flew over the controls, trying to get the signal back. "Nothing. We can't get them back, Captain," she said, her voice tight. "But the transmission was legitimate. There's no doubt. They're out there." The captain's mind raced. A Resistance fleet. He had hoped for help, but this was a game changer. He had been prepared to face the Empire alone, but now he realized the stakes were higher than ever. If Major Kyle and the Resistance had found them, they might have a chance to break the Empire's grip. "What's the status on that dreadnought?" the captain asked, trying to refocus his mind. The tactical officer's fingers flew over her panel. "Still closing in fast, but there's a delay. They're preparing for another strike, Captain." The captain's thoughts swirled. The stakes had just been raised. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were trying to turn the tide of the entire war. If the Resistance really was coming, if they could just hold on for a little longer, there was a chance they could strike a devastating blow to the Empire's power. But time was running out, and the dreadnought wasn't backing down. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," the captain ordered, his mind already calculating their next move. "We need to buy as much time as we can." As the ship veered wildly, dodging another barrage of enemy fire, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. The crew was on the edge, knowing the future of humanity might depend on their next move. Could the Resistance really save them, or was it already too late? The answer was unclear. But one thing was certain: this battle was far from over. The ship shuddered violently as another blast from the Empire's dreadnought tore through the empty space ahead, narrowly missing them. The crew had never been more on edge, but now there was a new fire in their eyes. The possibility of help, the chance for a real shift in the balance of power, it was enough to breathe new life into their exhausted bodies. "Stay focused," the captain commanded, his voice firm despite the chaos around them. "We have to make it through just a little longer. Keep the pressure on them." His crew nodded silently, each one fighting the same battle of nerves. The dreadnought loomed larger in the distance, but now the captain could see the glimmers of hope through the shadows. If the Resistance fleet had indeed found them, there was a chance, just a small one, that they could turn the tide. But time was running out. "Enemy fleet is closing in," the tactical officer warned, her voice strained. "They've adjusted their targeting. We're running out of room to maneuver." The ship lurched again as another salvo of energy blasts slammed into the hull. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered. The hum of the engines grew uneven, and the crew knew they couldn't hold out forever without a desperate plan. The captain clenched his fists. They needed the resistance to arrive now. But just as the dreadnought prepared to fire once again, the transmission crackled to life. This time, the voice was clearer, urgent. "Captain, this is Major Kyle. We're coming in hot. Hang tight. We'll be there in less than 5 minutes." The captain felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. A sound, like a distant thunderclap, filled the cabin. Something was happening outside. Something they weren't prepared for. "Captain, look!" the pilot shouted. Through the viewport, the crew saw what could only be described as an explosion of light. A massive fleet, more ships than they had ever imagined, emerged from the depths of the asteroid belt. But these were no ordinary ships. The gleaming vessels of the Resistance were unlike anything the captain had ever seen, their designs sleek, fast, and deadly. The ships formed a tight formation and dove straight into the heart of the battle. It was chaos. The Empire's fleet, still reeling from the earlier confusion, began to break apart as the Resistance ships tore into them with precision and speed. The Empire's dreadnought opened fire, but it was too late. The Resistance had already infiltrated its blind spots, slipping through the gaps with deadly efficiency. Small blasts erupted from the surface of the dreadnought as the Resistance targeted its key systems. Then, the unexpected happened. The flagship of the Empire, the mighty dreadnought, started to retreat. "Why are they pulling back?" the tactical officer asked, confused. The massive ship had never shown any sign of retreat before. The captain's eyes narrowed, watching the dreadnought maneuver away from the battle. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a victory, at least not yet. There was more to this than met the eye. Suddenly, a message cut through the comm system, and the voice of an unfamiliar officer crackled across the line. "Captain of the Resistance ship, you are wasting your time. You think you've won? We have already deployed the second wave." Before the captain could react, an explosion rocked the battlefield, far larger than anything they had witnessed so far. The distant explosion illuminated the entire sector, like a sun exploding. The shockwave reverberated through the entire fleet, throwing ships off course. The Empire's forces weren't retreating. They were launching their final weapon. The captain's heart raced as he watched the disturbance grow. A massive object, larger than anything in the battle, had emerged from the heart of the asteroid field. It was moving fast, but it was unmistakably another dreadnought newly built, its surface smooth and gleaming with dark metallic armor. The second wave had arrived, and it was massive. The Resistance fleet, still caught in the chaos of the first wave's destruction, didn't have time to reposition. The Empire had already set the stage for their next move. The captain's voice cracked as he barked orders, his mind running at full speed. "We need to get out of here. Now, don't engage. Get us back to the asteroid cluster." The ship lurched forward again, its engines sputtering as they fought to outrun the shockwave. The new dreadnought's arrival had shifted the momentum back to the Empire. The Empire wasn't just sending ships, it was sending the last of their power, their final gambit. But then, as if on cue, the sky erupted in a brilliant burst of energy. The captain's breath caught in his throat as he watched the blast tear through the space where the Empire's dreadnought had just been. The flash of light blinded them for a moment, but when the glare faded, the dreadnought was gone. Vanished in an instant, leaving nothing but debris floating in space. "Impossible," the tactical officer whispered. The captain's mind was spinning. He knew they were outnumbered, but he hadn't expected something like this. Who had attacked? It couldn't have been one of theirs. Their ships were still caught in the first wave. Was it the Empire's doing? Then, the voice returned over the comms, now clear and victorious. We've secured the dreadnought. The second wave has been neutralized. Captain, we've done it. It was Major Kyle. The captain couldn't believe his ears. The Resistance had done the impossible. They had taken out the second wave, the Empire's last weapon. The remaining Empire ships, now left without their final line of defense, began to scatter, retreating into the far reaches of the galaxy. The battlefield was still, the tension lifting for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Is it over? The pilot asked softly, looking up from her controls. The captain took a deep breath. They had won, but it wasn't over yet. The war wasn't done, not by a long shot. The Empire had been struck a severe blow, but the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and obstacles. He turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. It's a victory, but we're not finished yet. Humanity has shown what we can do when we fight together. But this is just the beginning. As the Resistance fleet continued to move into formation, the captain allowed himself one brief moment of relief. They had faced an impossible foe, and against all odds, they had won. But deep down, he knew this was just the first step in the long battle for the future of the galaxy. And they would be ready. The tension from the battle had barely subsided when the Resistance fleet began to regroup, pulling together after their hard-earned victory. Ships that had been damaged in the fight limped into position, their hulls scorched and systems flickering, but they were intact. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crew of the human ship allowed themselves to breathe. The Empire's once unshakable grip on the galaxy had been shattered. The captain stood at the bridge, his gaze drifting across the star-filled expanse outside the viewport. The remnants of the Empire's forces were retreating, scattered like leaves in the wind. The Resistance had struck at the heart of the Empire, and for the first time in decades, the balance of power had tipped in favor of those who still believed in freedom. But while the captain couldn't deny the magnitude of the victory, he knew this was only the beginning. "Captain," the communications officer said, her voice cutting through the stillness of the room. "We've received a transmission from Major Kyle." "Put it through," the captain replied, his eyes still focused on the vastness of space. The moment felt surreal, like the calm after a storm. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The screen flickered before showing Major Kale's stern face. Despite the visible damage to her ship, there was a sense of calm in her demeanor. "Captain, you've done it," Kyle said. "The Empire's forces have been routed. Their leadership is in disarray. The second wave has been neutralized. The galaxy is watching, and they know the tides have changed." The captain's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. They had achieved what many thought impossible. But the Major's next words sent a wave of gravity through his chest. "It's not over yet, though," Kyle continued, her voice steady but laden with the weight of what was to come. "The Empire isn't gone, Captain. We've only cut off its head. The rest of its power is spread across countless systems, some of them entrenched deep in the heart of Imperial space. We can't rest now." The captain nodded, already knowing the truth in her words. The battle they had fought, while decisive, was only one piece of a much larger war. There were still systems under Imperial control, still millions of people suffering under their iron grip. They had won a significant battle, but the war was far from over. "We'll press on," the captain replied, his voice filled with determination. "We've made our mark, but now we need to gather support. We need to unite the other colonies, rally those who have fallen under the Empire's rule. The galaxy won't free itself on its own. Kale's eyes hardened. Agreed, but be prepared. The Empire's retaliation won't come quickly. They'll regroup, and they'll try to crush us all at once. They'll come at us with everything they've got. The captain felt a chill run down his spine at the thought. The Empire had been relentless before, and now, with their power fractured, they would stop at nothing to reclaim control. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of the galaxy. And the road ahead was long and perilous. "I'll be ready," the captain said. "We'll be ready." Kyle nodded. "I'll send the coordinates for our next rally point. We're going to need every ship, every fighter, every soul we can gather. This war isn't over." The transmission ended, and the crew on the bridge exchanged solemn glances. The excitement of their victory still lingered, but it was tempered by the reality of what lay ahead. The Empire had suffered a major blow, but it would not go quietly into the night. The captain turned back to his crew, his mind already focused on the next step. "Prepare the ship for travel," he ordered. "We're going to need supplies, reinforcements, and most importantly, the galaxy isn't going to free itself." As the ship began to power up for its next mission, the captain allowed himself a brief moment to reflect on how far they had come. Just a few short years ago, humanity had been nothing more than a distant memory in the galaxy's history. Now, they had proven themselves. They had faced the might of the Empire, and not only survived, but struck a decisive blow. But even as the human ship sped off into the unknown, its course set toward the next chapter in the galaxy's future, the captain knew this was only a small victory in the grand scheme of things. The Empire had fractured, but its power wasn't gone. They had made enemies, and they had made allies. In this new world, nothing would be simple. The struggles ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before, and the sacrifices would be immense. And yet, despite the uncertainty, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, there was hope. Humanity had faced the unimaginable and come out on top. That hope, that drive to push forward, no matter the cost, was what would carry them through. The captain could feel it in his bones, a fire that burned brighter than any force the Empire could muster. As the ship entered the new sector, the captain turned to his crew one last time. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "We've started something bigger than ourselves. We've proven that one human ship can make a difference. Now, we make sure that this galaxy remembers it." The crew nodded. A silent agreement passed between them all. There was work to be done, allies to be found, battles to be fought. But for the first time in ages, they weren't just surviving. They were fighting for something greater. The stars ahead were filled with possibilities. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity was here to stay. And no matter how much the Empire tried to fight back, they would never be able to extinguish that fire. It had been lit long ago, and now it burned brighter than ever before.